Clara never expected that a simple visit to an animal shelter would change her life forever. Zeus, a playful and mischievous Labrador, brought chaos into her and Michael's home, but also something far greater, a profound bond that would carry them through their darkest moments. When an unexpected accident reveals Zeus's extraordinary instincts, his loyalty is tested in ways Clara and Michael could never have imagined. But can the love of a family endure loss, distance, and the passage of time? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Here, each video is a journey of overcoming and emotion that you won't want to miss. Clara's footsteps echoed down the narrow hallway of the animal shelter, her grip tightening around the adoption papers in her hand. Her heart raced, not from exertion, but from anticipation. Beside her, her husband, Michael, trailed with a mix of curiosity and skepticism etched on his face. He had never been entirely sold on the idea of getting a dog, but after months of Clara's quiet persistence, he had finally relented. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "With everything going on at work and, well, everything else?" Clara turned to face him, her eyes glinting with a determination he hadn't seen in weeks. "Michael, we need this. You know how hard things have been for me since the miscarriage. I can't keep walking around feeling this empty. A dog might bring some of that joy back into our lives." Michael hesitated, but before he could respond, the shelter attendant, a petite woman with bright green eyes and an oversized sweater, appeared from behind a counter. "You must be the Stewarts," she said warmly. "Come with me. We've got a few rescues I think you'll love." Clara and Michael followed the attendant through a door that led to the kennels. The air was thick with the sounds of barking, whining, and the occasional metallic clink of a tail wagging against a kennel door. Clara's eyes darted from one cage to another, her heart aching for each animal that watched her with desperate eyes. But one kennel caught her attention. Inside was a sleek, black Labrador Retriever mix. Unlike the other dogs, he didn't bark or jump at the bars. He sat calmly, his intelligent eyes locked onto hers. His tail wagged slowly, almost as if he knew she was meant to find him. "That's Zeus," the attendant said, noticing Clara's reaction. "He's about 9 months old. Full of energy and curiosity. Honestly, a bit of a handful. He was surrendered by a family who couldn't keep up with him. But he's got a good heart." Clara knelt down, her fingers brushing against the bars. Zeus moved closer, his nose pressing against her hand. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. "I want him," she said firmly, glancing at Michael. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You sure you don't want to look at the others? Maybe one a little calmer?" Clara shook her head. "It has to be him." Within the hour, the adoption papers were signed, and Zeus bounded into their car with the exuberance of a dog who had just won the lottery. As they drove home, Zeus alternated between sticking his head out the window and trying to crawl into Clara's lap. Michael shot her a sidelong glance as she laughed, the sound a relief after weeks of silence. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he muttered. Clara smiled, scratching Zeus behind the ears. "Welcome home, boy," she whispered. But what Clara didn't know was that Zeus would soon become more than just a pet. He would become the heart of their home, and the catalyst for events that would change their lives forever. The first morning with Zeus felt like a whirlwind. Clara woke to the sound of something crashing in the living room. She bolted out of bed, Michael groaning behind her, "What now?" When she reached the living room, she found Zeus triumphantly standing over the shattered remains of a flower pot, his tail wagging as if he'd discovered a treasure. Dirt was scattered across the rug, and the flowers lay limp and broken. "Zeus!" Clara exclaimed, hands on her hips. The dog looked at her, cocking his head innocently, before grabbing a leaf in his mouth and trotting off as if it were a prize. Michael appeared in the doorway, still rubbing his eyes. "So, how's that joy working out for you?" he quipped, barely hiding a smirk. Clara shot him a glare before chasing after Zeus. The days that followed proved just how much of a handful Zeus could be. He chewed through Clara's favorite pair of sneakers, shredded a cushion, and somehow managed to open the pantry door, devouring an entire loaf of bread before they could stop him. His boundless energy seemed to fill every corner of the house, leaving little room for peace. Yet, amidst the chaos, there were moments of undeniable charm. When Clara sat down at her desk to work, Zeus would rest his head on her lap, his big brown eyes watching her intently. When Michael came home late from the office, Zeus greeted him like a long-lost friend, leaping up to place his paws on Michael's shoulders. But it was during an evening walk that the first crack in Michael's resistance appeared. Clara had been struggling to control Zeus's excited pulling when a sudden gust of wind knocked her off balance. Zeus froze, looking back at her with concern. When she laughed, brushing herself off, Michael reached for the leash. "Here, let me try," he said, his voice softer than usual. Zeus seemed to sense the change. Instead of pulling, he matched Michael's pace, his tail wagging steadily. Clara watched as Michael's expression softened, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Back at home, however, the chaos resumed. Zeus discovered the joy of chasing the vacuum cleaner, barking furiously at the noisy machine while Clara tried, and failed, to keep a straight face. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Clara slumped onto the couch, Zeus flopping down beside her. "He's a menace," Michael said, joining them. But? Clara prompted, raising an eyebrow. Michael sighed, scratching Zeus behind the ears. "He's kind of growing on me." Clara smiled, leaning her head against Michael's shoulder. "Told you he'd be worth it." Zeus, oblivious to the conversation, wagged his tail in approval. For all the destruction and mischief, there was something about him that made the house feel alive again. But life with Zeus was about to take an unexpected turn, one that neither Clara nor Michael could foresee. Zeus's boundless energy slowly began to shift the rhythm of Clara and Michael's lives. Morning jogs became a necessity, not just for Zeus but for them as well, as they sought ways to channel his enthusiasm. It was during one of these early runs that Clara first noticed something peculiar about Zeus. They were jogging through a quiet park, the morning sun casting golden rays through the trees. Zeus trotted ahead, sniffing everything in sight, when he suddenly stopped. His ears perked, his body rigid. Clara followed his gaze and saw a woman sitting on a bench, head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Zeus, come on," Clara urged, tugging the leash gently. But Zeus didn't budge. He turned to Clara, whined softly, then looked back at the woman. Before Clara could react, Zeus tugged free of her grip and bounded over to the bench. "Zeus!" Clara called, her heart racing as she ran after him. When she reached the woman, Zeus was sitting quietly at her feet, his head resting on her lap. The woman looked up, startled at first, but her expression softened as she petted Zeus's head. Tears streaked her face, but for the first time, a faint smile appeared. "He's comforting," the woman said, her voice shaky. "Thank you." Clara apologized profusely, but the woman shook her head. "No, it's okay. He's sweet. I needed that." As they walked back home, Zeus trotting happily by her side, Clara couldn't shake the moment from her mind. Zeus had sensed something she hadn't. That evening, Clara recounted the event to Michael. "It's like he knew she was sad," she said, scratching Zeus behind the ears. Michael laughed lightly. "He probably just wanted to say hello." But deep down, Clara wasn't so sure. Zeus's perceptiveness became more apparent as the weeks went on. One rainy afternoon, Clara sat on the couch, staring blankly at her laptop. She had been trying to write, but the words wouldn't come. Memories of the baby they had lost crept into her thoughts, filling her with a familiar ache. Zeus, who had been chewing on a toy nearby, suddenly stopped. He walked over to Clara and rested his head on her lap, nudging her hand with his nose. "Hey, boy," she murmured, her voice trembling. She began to stroke his fur, tears spilling down her cheeks. Zeus stayed still, his presence grounding her in a way that no words could. When Michael came home that evening, he found Clara curled up on the couch, Zeus lying beside her. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Clara nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Zeus knew," she said softly. "It's like he can feel it when something's wrong." Michael sat down, watching as Zeus wagged his tail and looked up at Clara with those big, understanding eyes. "Maybe he's smarter than we give him credit for," Michael said, reaching out to pet him. Zeus's ability to connect with people wasn't just limited to his family. At a neighborhood gathering one weekend, he became the star of the show. Children giggled as they threw a ball for him to fetch, while adults marveled at how calm and attentive he was around an elderly neighbor with mobility issues. "He's special," one neighbor remarked. Clara smiled, watching Zeus curl up next to the elderly woman's feet. "Yeah, he is," she replied, her heart swelling with pride. But while Zeus brought moments of joy and connection, life wasn't without its challenges. One evening, Clara and Michael returned from a walk to find that Zeus had managed to open the cabinet under the sink. Cleaning supplies were scattered everywhere, and he had chewed through a sponge. "Zeus!" Michael scolded, his frustration evident. But as they cleaned up the mess, Michael's anger faded. He looked at Zeus, who sat in a corner with his head bowed, his tail thumping guiltily against the floor. "You're lucky you're adorable," Michael muttered, shaking his head. Clara laughed, pulling Zeus into a hug. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice filled with affection. What they didn't know was that Zeus's intuition and loyalty would soon be tested in ways they never imagined. It started like any other day, with Clara and Michael sipping coffee in the kitchen while Zeus sprawled across the floor, gnawing on his favorite toy. The morning air was crisp, and Clara had just mentioned taking Zeus for a longer walk when Michael's phone buzzed on the counter. "It's work," Michael said, sighing as he answered the call. He stepped out of the room, his voice fading as he discussed yet another last-minute project. Clara knelt to pat Zeus, her mind already mapping out their route through the neighborhood. "What do you think, boy? Ready for an adventure?" she asked. Zeus wagged his tail enthusiastically in response. But the walk would have to wait. A loud, sharp noise came from outside, causing both Clara and Zeus to freeze. The sound wasn't one they heard often, a car screeching to a halt, followed by the unmistakable crunch of metal on metal. Clara rushed to the window, her heart pounding. A few houses down, two cars were tangled in the intersection, one of them smoking slightly from under the hood. A small crowd was already gathering, but it was Zeus's reaction that startled her. He barked furiously, pacing back and forth between Clara and the front door. His urgency was palpable. "What is it, Zeus?" Clara asked, but he didn't calm down. Instead, he pawed at the door, whining in a way she had never heard before. Against her better judgment, Clara grabbed his leash and opened the door. "Okay, let's go." "But you're staying with me," she said firmly, clipping the leash to his collar. Zeus pulled her down the sidewalk, his usually playful demeanor replaced by something more serious. When they reached the scene of the accident, Clara's breath caught in her throat. One of the drivers, a young woman, was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. A toddler in the back seat screamed inconsolably, trapped in his car seat. The other driver stood outside his car, shouting into his phone, oblivious to the child's cries. Before Clara could think, Zeus yanked hard on his leash, barking at the trapped child. "Zeus, no!" Clara exclaimed, but the dog ignored her, pulling toward the car with an intensity she had never seen before. The bystanders exchanged worried glances but did nothing. Clara, realizing no one else was taking action, rushed to the car, Zeus leading the way. She peered inside, her heart sinking at the sight of the unconscious driver. "Someone call an ambulance," she shouted to the onlookers. Zeus whined, pawing at the car door, his attention fixated on the toddler. Clara reached for the handle, finding it locked. The child's face was red and tear-streaked, his cries growing weaker. A man from the crowd approached, wielding a tire iron. "Step back," he said, shattering the passenger window in a single swing. Clara flinched at the sound but quickly unlocked the door from the inside. Zeus immediately climbed into the car, his tail wagging slightly as he gently nudged the toddler's hand with his nose. The child's cries quieted as he looked at Zeus, his small fingers reaching for the dog's fur. "Good boy," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. The man helped Clara unbuckle the car seat, lifting the toddler out and placing him on the ground. Zeus stayed by the child's side, licking his cheek as if to reassure him. Moments later, the wail of sirens filled the air. Paramedics arrived, taking over the scene. Clara watched as they carefully removed the unconscious driver and assessed the toddler, who clung to Zeus as if he were a lifeline. That night, the events of the day replayed in Clara's mind. Zeus lay curled up on the floor, his usual energy subdued. "You were amazing today," Clara said softly, kneeling beside him. "You knew, didn't you? You knew they needed help." Michael, who had heard the story as soon as he got home, crouched next to Clara. "He's more than just a dog," Michael said, stroking Zeus's head. The local news covered the story the following day, and Zeus became something of a neighborhood hero. Strangers stopped Clara and Michael during their walks, wanting to meet the dog who had helped save a child. But while the world saw Zeus as extraordinary, Clara and Michael knew that he was more than that. He was family. What they didn't realize was that Zeus's instinct to protect would soon be tested again, this time much closer to home. Zeus had become the heart of Clara and Michael's home, his heroism in the recent accident cementing his place in their family. But life rarely gives long moments of peace. It started one evening when Michael returned from work, his face tense. "Clara, we need to talk," he said, setting his briefcase on the table. Clara's stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We're being sent to the New York office. It's a big promotion, but it's temporary. 6 months at most." "That's great," Clara said, her excitement faltering when she saw Michael's expression. "Clara, the apartment they're offering doesn't allow pets. We can't bring Zeus." The words hit her like a blow. "What do you mean we can't bring him? He's part of our family, Michael." Michael sat down, taking her hand. I know. But it's a short-term move, and we don't have any other option. I've already called my sister. She said she can take care of Zeus while we're gone." Clara's heart sank, and tears pricked her eyes. "He won't understand. He'll think we abandoned him." Michael nodded, his voice soft. "I hate this too. But we'll visit whenever we can, and when we're back, he'll come home. It's not forever." A week later, Michael's sister, Sarah, arrived to pick up Zeus. Clara tried to act calm, stuffing Zeus's favorite toys and blanket into a bag, but her hands trembled. Zeus watched the scene unfold with a curious tilt of his head, his tail wagging hesitantly. When Sarah arrived, he greeted her warmly, his usual excitement on display. But as Clara and Michael walked him to Sarah's car, Zeus's demeanor shifted. He hesitated at the car door, looking back at Clara with wide, questioning eyes. "It's okay, boy," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. She knelt, hugging him tightly. "We'll see you soon, I promise." Zeus whined softly but allowed Sarah to lift him into the back seat. As the car pulled away, Clara stood frozen on the curb, tears streaming down her face. Michael placed a comforting arm around her shoulder, but the emptiness in their home that night was palpable. Life in New York was a whirlwind of meetings, deadlines, and late nights. Clara threw herself into work, hoping to fill the void left by Zeus's absence. But every evening, when she returned to their small, quiet apartment, she felt the weight of his absence. Michael tried to reassure her. "Sarah says he's doing great. He's getting spoiled with treats and walks." But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. During one of their video calls with Sarah, Zeus appeared on the screen, wagging his tail wildly at the sound of their voices. Clara smiled through her tears. "I miss you so much, boy," she said, her voice trembling. Zeus barked in response, and for a brief moment, the distance didn't feel so vast. Back at Sarah's house, Zeus wasn't his usual self. He ate less, played only half-heartedly, and spent hours staring out the window. Sarah did her best to keep him engaged, but nothing seemed to bring back his spark. One stormy night, Zeus became restless. He paced by the door, his ears perked at every sound. Sarah tried to calm him, but his agitation only grew. Finally, he began to howl, a mournful, heart-wrenching sound that echoed through the house. Meanwhile, in New York, Clara jolted awake in the middle of the night, a sinking feeling in her chest. She reached for her phone, hesitating before dialing Sarah. "Clara?" Sarah answered groggily. "What's wrong? Is Zeus okay?" Clara asked, her voice tight with worry. Sarah sighed. "He's been restless tonight. I think he misses you." Clara felt tears well up. I think I made a mistake. He needs us as much as we need him." Michael stirred beside her. "What's going on?" Clara hung up, her voice resolute. "We're going back to him, Michael. I don't care about the logistics or the apartment policy. We made a promise to him." Michael sat up, studying her face. He nodded after a moment. "Let's go get our boy." It was early morning when Clara and Michael pulled into Sarah's driveway. The air was crisp, and a soft glow painted the horizon as the sun began to rise. Clara's hands trembled on the car door, a mixture of anticipation and guilt swirling in her chest. Inside, Zeus was already awake. He had spent the night pacing, his instincts sharp as if sensing that something was about to change. When the sound of a car door echoed in the stillness, his ears perked. Sarah opened the door to see Clara and Michael standing on her porch. Before she could say a word, Zeus barreled past her, leaping into Clara's arms with a joyous bark. Clara sank to her knees, hugging him tightly as tears streamed down her face. "I'm so sorry, boy," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. "We'll never leave you again." Zeus licked her cheek, his tail wagging furiously, as if to say all was forgiven. Michael knelt beside them, rubbing Zeus's head. "We missed you, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The drive back home was filled with a sense of completeness. Zeus alternated between sticking his head out the window and curling up in Clara's lap. For the first time in weeks, the tension in the air had lifted. Back at their apartment, they faced their next challenge. The landlord had made it clear that pets were not allowed, but Clara and Michael were resolute. "I'll talk to him," Michael said, setting down Zeus's leash. "We're not losing him again." To their surprise, the landlord, a stern man with a reputation for being inflexible, softened when he heard about Zeus's story. "He saved a child?" the landlord asked, his brow furrowing. Michael nodded. "And he's been a part of our family through everything. We'll do whatever it takes to keep him here." The landlord sighed, then waved a hand dismissively. "Fine. Just make sure he doesn't chew on anything that's not yours." Clara and Michael exchanged relieved smiles. Zeus, as if understanding the victory, barked happily. Life settled into a new rhythm. Clara and Michael found ways to adapt their busy schedules to Zeus's needs, and their bond with him only grew stronger. Zeus returned to his joyful, energetic self, bringing laughter and light back into their home. But as the years passed, the vibrant black fur around Zeus's muzzle began to turn gray, and his once boundless energy gave way to a more measured pace. He still loved his walks and wagged his tail at every opportunity, but Clara and Michael couldn't ignore the signs of aging. One evening, as the three of them sat together on the couch, Michael voiced what neither of them wanted to admit. "He's slowing down," he said quietly, stroking Zeus's back. Clara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't want to think about it." But time marches on, and one crisp autumn morning, Zeus didn't get up to greet them. Clara found him lying peacefully in his bed, his body still and his eyes closed. "No," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. Michael appeared moments later, his face pale as he crouched beside her. Together, they held Zeus, their tears falling freely as they said their goodbyes. In the weeks that followed, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. Clara and Michael struggled to adjust to life without Zeus, their constant companion. One day, while sorting through a box of memories, Clara found a photo of Zeus as a puppy, his eyes full of mischief and joy. She smiled through her tears, realizing that Zeus had given them more than they could ever repay. "Let's do something," Clara said, holding up the photo. Michael looked at her, curious. "Let's help other dogs like Zeus. Let's make sure they find families who will love them as much as we loved him." Michael nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. He'd like that. The Stewarts founded a local rescue fund in Zeus's honor, dedicating their time to helping animals in need. They shared Zeus's story at every opportunity, reminding others of the profound bond that could form between humans and their pets. Years later, their home was once again filled with the pitter-patter of paws as they adopted another rescue dog, a spirited golden retriever they named Hope. But no matter how full their lives became, Zeus remained with them, in the memories he had created, in the lessons he had taught, and in the love that had forever changed their hearts. The legacy of Zeus wasn't just in his life, it was in how he inspired them to keep loving, giving, and cherishing every moment they had with those they held dear. If you liked this story and want more content like this, leave a like, share it with someone you know will be moved by it, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will explore inspiring stories and moments that touch the heart. Until the next video.